If I had a podcast and it was equally basketball, football, tennis, and professional wrestling, and I could do that either by having 25% of it, maybe it's an hour, I do 15 minutes in one area, take a break, do 15 minutes in another area, take a break, 15 minutes in a third area, take a break, and 15 minutes in the fourth area. Or I had a podcast where every now and again, there was an episode about wrestling. Every now and again, there was a tennis. Every now and again, there was I think I used football and basketball. Every now and again, there was a football. Every now and again, there was whatever I said, 4 different sports, and you only like 1 or 2 of them. How do you feel during the episodes that don't serve you?
I think that what ends up happening is when you start seeing that there's content in the same feed that is not related to what you're there for, you start tuning the podcast out. One thing that we found through research is you want to build consistency with your listeners. And that comes from a bunch of things. That comes from publishing your content at the same time, building a routine for your podcast listeners to come to review your content or to listen to your content, but it also comes down to what you're putting out. And if you're giving people the indication that, okay, cool, let's use again, professional wrestling, we'll keep there. I'm a professional wrestling podcast, but every now and again, I'll do football, I'll do soccer, I'll do basketball. That's fine, but you're not serving the needs of the market that you're trying to grow. And every podcaster should be thinking about that when they're putting out content, when they're creating content, when they're releasing ancillary content on their social media for marketing, whatever the case may be. There's always going to be one market that you want to target more than another. And again, people will see things, for example, like Bleacher Report, for example, ones that cover all different topics, right? And Bleacher Report, ESPN, let's just use some of those bigger news outlets, right, as an example. But you see how niche each of those specific subdivisions can be. You don't have one writer writing for all 5 or 6 verticals. You have one for each. And there is something to be said for that. A lot of people, if they want to start different podcasts that target different things, they might start a podcast network or join a podcast network that makes sense for them to do. But if you turn around and you say, okay, I'm going to put out, let's say, 1 podcast a week, which is what a lot of podcasters do. They put out 1 podcast a week and 3 of those are in one field, professional wrestling, and then 1 is football. And then they put out another one that's basketball, maybe back to back with that. Then they have 3 about wrestling. Well, what you're doing is you're starting to break apart that audience that you've built up in that specific vertical. So the thing is, if you are considering starting to, let's say, review other things, a lot of the times the podcasters that have most success with jumping outside of that niche market are ones that have been around for a while, ones that already have a dedicated fan base for one specific niche. And then they turn around and they say, you know what, maybe I've been around for a couple of years. Maybe I have the listenership in this vertical that I want. So let's go ahead and bring in another one. And what we'll do is we'll create a separate channel for it, or we'll just let the listeners know to expect this behavior. Maybe if I'm releasing 4 episodes every month, maybe I'll let them know that on a Friday I'm doing this, but then on Tuesdays I'm starting to release this kind of podcast. It could still, in my opinion, make the most sense to separate them into their own podcasts as opposed to still having them in one place. And if you have more than one podcast, you can start creating this identity of you being a podcast network with each of the individual podcasts having their own focus, growing the audience in a much stronger way, and also building your brand overall. So kind of, I know that we're speaking about podcasters that have just started or podcasters that are maybe in year 1 or year 2. The focus up front should always be on that smaller niche audience to grow your visibility. And then if you decide later on, look, we've all got different passions out there. Everyone that we speak to, all the different podcasts that we work with, everyone's got different passions outside of just the one thing they're coming to you with. And there's nothing wrong with going forward and, exploring that, but do it smart, do it wise, develop one piece first, and then continue on with something else. And it's what we talk about. If you might have had guests on here also that have maybe talked about passive income, creating multiple streams of income. It's the same exact thing. Eventually they become passive pieces of income, but you have to start with one first, grow that, let people know what it's about. Once that's doing its thing effectively, then you move on to the next, move on to the next, move on to the next.